Throughout history, certain empires rose above all others in size, strength, and influence. They reshaped the world around them through their military power. For today's video, I'm going to take a look at 15 of the most powerful ancient empires in history. Let's start with number 15, the Hittite Empire. So the Hittite Empire was a powerful Bronze Age civilization centered in Anatolia, that's modern-day Turkey, which rose to prominence around 1600 BCE, and it remained influential all the way until its collapse around 1178 BCE. They were known for their military innovations, political diplomacy, and legal advancements. The empire became one of the dominant powers in the ancient Near East, rivaling Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia during the Late Bronze Age. Their origins trace back to Indo-European-speaking peoples who migrated into central Anatolia around 2000 BCE. By approximately 1650 BCE, they had established their capital at Hattusa, a fortified city with advanced urban planning and large stone walls. King Hattusili I was among the early rulers who began expanding his territory, but it was under King Suppiluliuma I, about 1344 BCE, that the Hittite Empire reached its territorial and political peak. The king led successful campaigns into Syria and northern Mesopotamia, defeating the Mitanni and establishing vassal states that extended their influence across the Levant. The Hittites were known for their military capability. They fielded chariot-based armies, often considered among the most effective of their time. These chariots were lighter and more maneuverable than those of their rivals, giving them an advantage in open battlefield conditions. Their ability to coordinate large armies across huge terrains was essential to their success. In addition to the warfare, they were skilled diplomats. They were among the first to formalize peace treaties in written form. The most well-known of these is the Treaty of Kadesh, signed between the Hittite king and the Egyptian pharaoh. This treaty, carved into stone and written in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Akkadian cuneiform, is one of the oldest known international peace accords, and it reflects the Hittites' role in regional politics. The Hittites practiced a syncretic religion that incorporates deities from neighboring cultures into their own pantheon. Their religious practices were polytheistic and included elaborate ceremonies, offerings, and rituals. The Hittite kings were also considered high priests, reinforcing the bond between religious authority and political power. The decline, though, of the Hittite Empire was part of the broader collapse of Bronze Age civilizations around the 12th century BCE. Scholars attribute this fall to a combination of internal unrest, invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples, and possible climate change that disrupted agricultural production. However, Hittite culture survived in the form of smaller Neo-Hittite states that persisted in southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria for several centuries. Discoveries at Hattusa and other sites have revealed massive fortifications, palaces, and temples that demonstrate the sophistication of the Hittite state. Their contributions to diplomacy, law, and military strategy make them one of the most powerful and influential empires of the ancient world. Number 14, the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire, also known as the First Persian Empire, was one of the largest and influential empires in ancient history. Founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BCE, it eventually stretched from the Balkans and Eastern Europe in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, encompassing parts of 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. At its height, under Darius I and Xerxes I, it governed over 40% of the global population, more than any empire before it. Cyrus the Great began the empire by overthrowing the Median kingdom and rapidly expanding his control over Lydia, that's in modern Turkey, Babylon, and parts of Central Asia. One of his best achievements was the conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE, after which he issued the Cyrus Cylinder, a declaration often cited as an early charter of human rights. It proclaimed religious tolerance and allowed displaced peoples like the Jews to return to their homeland. Under Darius I, the empire saw further expansion. Darius reorganized the empire into units called stratapes. These were administrative units, each governed by a satrap who reported to the king. The system enabled effective management over a vast territory, and he also introduced standardized currency, implemented taxation systems, and built extensive infrastructure, including a royal road, which facilitated rapid communication and trade across the empire. The Achaemenid military was formidable. Its strength lay in its diversity. Troops were drawn from across the empire, including Medes, Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Indians. The elite military unit known as the Immortals, composed of roughly 10,000 highly trained soldiers, served as the king's personal guard and the core of the army. The capital cities of Persepolis, Susa, and Pasargadae featured monumental palaces, audience halls, and ceremonial staircases adorned with reliefs depicting tribute bearers. Persepolis in particular was a symbol of imperial grandeur and the administrative centralization. Religious tolerance here was a hallmark of Achaemenid rule. While the Persian elite followed Zoroastrianism, the empire allowed subject peoples to worship their own gods and maintain their customs. Despite its strength, though, the Achaemenid Empire faced some challenges. The Greco-Persian Wars, particularly under Darius and Xerxes, resulted in costly military failures in Greece. The empire began to show signs of strain under the later kings, who struggled with internal dissent and succession disputes. The final blow came with the conquest of Alexander the Great. In 334 BCE, Alexander launched a campaign against Persia, defeating Darius III in 333 BCE and Gaugamela in 331 BCE. Following the fall of Persepolis and the death of Darius III, the Achaemenid Empire was effectively absorbed into Alexander's expanding Macedonian Empire. The legacy of the Achaemenid Empire, though, endured long after its fall. Its administrative techniques influenced the governance systems of subsequent empires, including the Seleucid, Parthian, and the Sassanian empires in Persia, and even the Roman and Byzantine states. The scale, organization, and tolerance of the Achaemenid state helped define imperial governance in the ancient world, and it established Persia as a key center of civilization for centuries. Number 13. The Maurya Empire. The Maurya Empire was one of the largest and most influential ones in ancient Indian history. Founded by Chandragupta Maurya in 321 BCE after the fall of the Nanda Dynasty. At its peak under Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BCE, the Maurya Empire stretched from modern-day Afghanistan and Iran in the northwest to Bengal in the east and as far south as the Deccan Plateau. It was the first empire to unify most of the Indian subcontinent under a single political entity. Chandragupta Maurya established the empire with the assistance of his chief advisor and strategist Chanakya, who authored the Arthashastra, a comprehensive treatise on statecraft, economics, and military strategy. With his guidance, Chandragupta overthrew the Macedonian satrapies left behind by Alexander the Great. He founded his capital at Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, which became one of the largest cities of the ancient world. Under Chandragupta's role, the empire maintained centralized administration. The emperor governed through a network of officials responsible for justice, taxation, agriculture, and trade. The state maintained a standing army of secret police network to ensure control and security, and infrastructure including roads and rest houses was developed to improve trade and communication. Chandragupta was succeeded by his son Bindusara, who expanded the empire further south, but it was Ashoka the Great, Bindusara's son, who transformed the Maurya Empire into a model of ancient governance. After the brutal Kalinga War around 261 BCE, which resulted in massive casualties, Ashoka experienced a profound change of conscience. He converted to Buddhism and adopted a policy of nonviolence, marking one of the earliest examples of a ruler renouncing violence after achieving military success. Ashoka's reign is notable for its promotion of Buddhist values, religious tolerance, and moral governance. He issued a series of edicts inscribed on rocks and pillars throughout the empire, promoting ethics, compassion, and respect among his subjects. These edicts also instructed officials to be just and equitable and encouraged the fair treatment of animals and the environment. Art and architecture flourished now, and some of the earliest examples of Indian stone sculpture, like the lion capital of Ashoka, now India's national emblem, date from this period. After Ashoka's death in 232 BCE, the empire began to decline. Internal succession struggles, regional revolts, and economic difficulties weakened the central authority. By 185 BC, the last Mauryan ruler was overthrown, marking the end of the empire. However, its legacy, particularly the administrative systems, the Buddhist influence, and moral governance of Ashoka, left a lasting impact on Indian civilization. Number 12. The Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, based in northern Mesopotamia, was one of the most powerful military states of the ancient world. It existed in several phases, with the Neo-Assyrian Empire, that's 911 to 609 BCE, representing the empire at its territorial and organizational peak. During this period, the Assyrians controlled huge areas that included much of the Middle East, from Egypt and Anatolia to Persia and the Persian Gulf. The early Assyrian state began as a collection of city-states, with the city of Ashur as its religious and political center. The Old Assyrian period, that's about 2025 to 1378 BCE, and Middle Assyrian period, about 1392 to 935 BCE, laid the foundation for later expansion. It was during this Neo-Assyrian period, however, that the empire truly became a dominant force. The Assyrians are most known for their military prowess. They developed one of the first professional standing armies, with specialized units including cavalry, archers, chariots, and siege engineers. They were also pioneers in siege warfare, using battering rams, sappers, and scaling ladders to breach any fortified cities. Their reputation for brutality was well documented. Assyrian kings used terror as a psychological weapon, publicly displaying the consequences of rebellion by executing prisoners, deporting populations, and destroying cities. These tactics helped deter uprisings and maintain control over distant provinces, though they also contributed to widespread resentment among the subjected peoples. The empire supported a thriving culture of art and scholarship. Assyrian reliefs carved into palace walls depicted military campaigns, royal hunts, and religious ceremonies in great detail. These works combined realism with imperial propaganda, emphasizing the might and legitimacy of the king. The most notable intellectual achievement was the Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, which housed thousands of clay tablets containing myths, religious texts, scientific treatises, and administrative records written in cuneiform. Religion too played a central role in Assyrian society. The chief deity, Ashur, was closely associated with the king's authority, and rulers portrayed themselves as divinely chosen to expand the empire. But despite its strength, the empire was vulnerable to internal and external pressures. Constant warfare drained resources and created administrative challenges. By the late 7th century BCE, revolts in Babylon and pressure from external enemies like the Medes, the Chaldeans, and the Scythians eroded the empire's control. In 612 BCE, though, Nineveh was sacked and destroyed, marking the effective end of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The fall of Assyria was sudden and dramatic, but its influence endured. Its military techniques, administrative systems, and the artistic styles were adopted by successor empires like the Babylonians and Persians. The Assyrians stand as a key example of how military innovation, centralized power, and infrastructure could sustain one of the ancient world's most formidable empires for centuries. Number 11. The Kingdom of Axum. The Kingdom of Axum was one of the most powerful ancient empires. It's located in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Axum emerged as a regional power by the 1st century CE, and it flourished until the early 7th century. It was a major trading empire, controlling key routes between the Roman Empire, India, Arabia, and Inner Africa. And at its peak, Axum was considered one of the 4 great powers of its time by Persian historians, alongside Rome, China, and Persia. The rise of Axum was closely tied to its strategic position along the Red Sea and its ability to dominate maritime trade and overland trade networks. Goods like ivory, gold, frankincense, myrrh, spices, animal hides, and of course slaves moved through the Axum territory. In return, the kingdom imported silk, glassware, and luxury items from the Mediterranean and Asia. It was also among the first African states to mint its own coinage. These coins, made of gold, silver, and bronze, bore inscriptions in Greek and later in Ge'ez, the local language. The use of coinage not only facilitated trade, but it also signaled the state's economic strength and its own sovereignty. Axumite coins have been found as far away as India, and it shows the empire's extensive connections. Politically, the Axumite kings exercised centralized control over a diverse territory that included agricultural highlands, desert lowlands, and coastal regions. The empire expanded through military campaigns and alliances, incorporating neighborhood tribes. Monumental architecture was used to project royal authority, with obelisks or stelae erected in the capital city of Axum to commemorate kings and their achievements. The largest surviving stele stands over 20 meters tall and carved with intricate details, including false doors and windows that symbolize the multi-story buildings. But one of the most significant events in Aksumite history happened during the reign of King Ezana in the early 4th century CE. Ezana converted to Christianity, making Axum the first major empire to adopt Christianity as its state religion, preceding even the Roman Empire. Missionaries from the Eastern Roman Empire influenced this conversion, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church would go on to become a foundational institution in the region for centuries. Inscriptions from Ezana's reign describe his campaigns, his conversion, and his religious dedication, showing the integration of faith and power here. Aksum's decline, though, began in the 7th century, triggered in part by the rise of Islam and the shift in trade routes. As Arab-Muslim traders began to dominate the Red Sea, Aksum's access to international trade diminished. Plus, environmental degradation, soil exhaustion, and the possible overuse of resources further strained the state. The capital was gradually relocated to the south, and by the 10th century, Axum had ceased to be a major political force. Nevertheless, its legacy endured. It laid the cultural and religious foundations for the Ethiopian Empire, which continued for over 1,000 years. Its achievements in trade, architecture, and religion, and governance mark it as one of the most powerful and advanced ancient African empires. Number 10. The Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire refers to two major periods in Mesopotamian history, when the city of Babylon served as the capital of a dominant empire, the Old Babylonian Empire that was from around 1894 to 1595 BCE, and then the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Both eras saw Babylon exert significant political, cultural, and military influence over the ancient Near East. The Old Empire rose under an Amorite king Hammurabi, who ruled from 1792 to 1750 BCE. Hammurabi expanded Babylon's territory through military conquest and political alliances, eventually unifying much of Mesopotamia under his rule. His legacy is the Code of Hammurabi, a comprehensive set of laws inscribed on a stone stele. This code established a standard of justice, commerce, property, and family law, using the principle of retributive justice and eye for an eye. While earlier legal codes existed, Hammurabi's was one of the most detailed and widely distributed, and it influenced legal systems for centuries. Babylon during this period became a center of learning, religion, and administration. The city was home to temples, palaces, and schools that trained scribes in cuneiform writing. Mathematics, astronomy, and literature all advanced under Babylonian patronage. The Epic of Gilgamesh, although originating in earlier Sumerian texts, was compiled into its most complete form during the Babylonian era. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, also called the Chaldean Empire, emerged centuries later under Nabopolassar, who expelled the Assyrians and declared Babylon independent in 626 BCE. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, ruled from 605 to 562 BCE. He's the most famous Babylonian ruler of his period. Nebuchadnezzar expanded the empire into the Levant, defeated the Egyptians, and captured Jerusalem, initiating the Babylonian captivity of the Jews in 586 BCE. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon reached the height of its architectural glory. The city was renowned for its massive walls, temples, and palaces. The Ishtar Gate, a grand ceremonial entrance, was adorned with glazed blue bricks and reliefs of animals. It became one of the wonders of the ancient world. Babylon's Hanging Gardens, though their exact nature and existence remain debated, were said to be an engineering marvel and a symbol of imperial wealth. Despite all the achievements, though, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was short-lived. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar, the empire faced political instability. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon with minimal resistance, incorporating it into the Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus was welcomed by many locals, and Babylon remained a major administrative center under the Persian rule. Babylon's influence extended far beyond the life of its political lifespan. The city and its culture became central in biblical tradition, Greek historiography, and later Islamic scholarship. Babylonian contributions to law, astronomy, and literature continued to shape civilizations long after the empire's fall. The image of Babylon as both a real place and a symbol of imperial grandeur remains one of the most enduring legacies of the ancient world. Number 9. The Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. The Macedonian Empire, though relatively short-lived, was one of the most powerful and far-reaching empires in the ancient world. It achieved its zenith under Alexander III of Macedon, commonly known as Alexander the Great. In just over a decade, Alexander created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to Egypt and as far east as India. His campaigns reshaped the ancient world politically, militarily, and culturally. Macedon, located in the northern Greek peninsula, had historically been viewed by the southern Greek city-states as a semi-barbaric kingdom. However, under the leadership of Philip II, Alexander's father, Macedonia was transformed into a formidable military power. Philip reorganized the army, introducing the phalanx formation with longer spears, and developed combined arms tactics that included cavalry, archers, and siege weaponry. By the time Alexander came to the throne in 336 BCE, following his father's assassination, Macedonia was the dominant power in Greece. Alexander was only 20 years old when he became king, but he quickly demonstrated both tactical genius and personal charisma. He consolidated power at home by neutralizing rivals and securing loyalty from key generals and nobles. Within 2 years, he had launched a military campaign against the Persian Empire, then the largest and most powerful state in the known world. His first major victory came at the Battle of Granicus in 334 BCE, where he defeated a Persian satrap army and established a foothold in Asia Minor. This was followed by the decisive Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, where Alexander faced King Darius III himself. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical maneuvering led to a major victory, forcing Darius to flee and leaving much of the Persian Empire open to Macedonian control. Despite having conquered Persia, Alexander continued his campaigns eastward. He led his troops into Central Asia, facing stiff resistance from nomadic tribes and local rulers. His most ambitious campaign was into the Indian subcontinent, where he fought the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BCE against King Porus. Although victorious, the battle was pretty costly, and Alexander's troops, exhausted and unwilling to go further, mutinied. Alexander agreed to turn back, though he continued consolidating control and found new cities along the way. Alexander's approach to governance was unique for his time. He often adopted elements of local customs and dress, married women from noble families of conquered regions, and encouraged his officers to do the same. His policy of fusion aimed to integrate Macedonians and Persians into a unified elite, though it was met with resistance from both groups. His use of satraps and local governors allowed a degree of administrative continuity, while also ensuring Macedonian oversight. Culturally, his conquests initiated the Hellenistic Age, a period marked by the spread of Greek language, art, science, and philosophy across a huge territory. Greek became the lingua franca of commerce and scholarship, and cities like Alexandria became melting pots of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian influences. This cultural diffusion had lasting impacts on everything: architecture, education, and governance in the Mediterranean and Near East. Alexander died in 323 BCE in Babylon, possibly of fever, poisoning, or other natural causes. He left no clear heir, leading to the division of his empire among his generals, the Diadochi. These successors carved out their own kingdoms, including the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire in Asia. Although the Macedonian Empire fragmented soon after his death, its legacy was profound, to say the least. The political map of the Near East was permanently altered, and the fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures gave rise to new forms of governance, religion, and scholarship. Alexander remains one of history's most studied military commanders, and his campaigns continue to be analyzed for their strategic brilliance. Number 8. The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it stands as one of the most influential and enduring empires in human history. At its height, it controlled huge territories across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, encompassing an estimated 50 to 70 million people. Roman law, engineering, architecture, military organization, and cultural achievements all had a lasting impact on the development of Western civilization. Rome began as a small city-state on the Tiber River in central Italy. Founded, according to tradition, in 753 BCE, it grew through a combination of military conquest, strategic alliances, and political innovation. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome had emerged as the dominant power in the Italian peninsula. The Punic Wars against Carthage marked Rome's rise to Mediterranean supremacy. The destruction of Carthage in the Third Punic War eliminated a major rival and allowed Rome to expand into North Africa, Spain, and even parts of the eastern Mediterranean. The transformation from republic to empire happened over several tumultuous decades. Marked by internal conflicts, power struggles, and civil wars, the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE triggered the final collapse of the Roman Republic. After years of civil war, Octavian, later known as Augustus, emerged victorious and became Rome's first emperor in 27 BCE. Under Augustus, the Roman state was restructured into a monarchy in all but name, ushering in the Pax Romana, Roman peace, a period of relative stability and prosperity lasting over 2 centuries. The Roman Empire reached its territorial height under Emperor Trajan. He ruled from 98 to 117 CE, stretching from Britain in the northwest to Mesopotamia in the east. It was governed through a complex bureaucracy and legal system. Provinces were administered by governors, appointed by the emperor, and a network of roads and postal stations allowed for effective communication and control. The Roman military, it was central to the empire's expansion and its maintenance. A professional standing army composed of legions with strict discipline and advanced training enabled Rome to subdue and defend its holdings. Military colonies and veteran settlements helped Romanize newly conquered regions. Roman culture emphasized civic life, public works, and legal order. Cities across the empire featured forums, amphitheaters, aqueducts, and baths. Latin, the language of administration, facilitated communication across regions, and Roman law was codified over centuries, and it influenced legal systems in Europe and beyond. The 12 Tables, the Justinian Code, and other legal texts became foundational references for centuries. Religion, too, in Rome evolved from a polytheistic pantheon modeled after the Greeks to an imperial cult in which emperors were deified. However, the most profound religious transformation came with the spread of Christianity. Initially persecuted, Christians gained legal status under Emperor Constantine and eventually became the dominant religion of the empire. The Edict of Milan legalized Christianity, and by the end of the 4th century, it was the official state religion. Despite its strength, though, the Roman Empire faced some challenges. Economic inequality, over-reliance on slave labor, administrative corruption, and military overextension weakened the entire state. In 285 CE, Emperor Diocletian divided the empire into eastern and western halves to improve the governance. That division eventually became permanent. The Western Roman Empire gradually declined, suffering from invasions by Germanic tribes, internal decay, and crises. Rome itself was sacked in 410 CE by the Visigoths, and once again in 455 CE by the Vandals. The traditional date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is 476 CE, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued on for nearly 1,000 more years, preserving Roman governance, law, and culture. Constantinople, founded by Constantine as the new capital in 333 CE, became one of the greatest cities of the medieval world. The Roman Empire's legacy is visible in countless aspects of our modern society, including legal codes, architectural styles, and languages derived from Latin, and ideas of republicanism and citizenship. The enduring influence of it makes it one of the most powerful and consequential empires ever. Moving on to number 7, the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, was one of the most enduring empires. It lasted 1,100 years from the fall of the Western Roman Empire until the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE. Rooted in Roman governance, like we just talked about, military structure, and legal traditions, this empire preserved and adapted the systems while incorporating Greek, Christian, and Middle Eastern influences. Its capital, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, became one of the wealthiest and most strategically important cities in the world. The origins of the empire trace back to the decision of Roman Emperor Diocletian in the 3rd century CE to divide the Roman Empire for more efficient administration. His successor, Constantine the Great, took the significant step of founding Constantinople in 333 CE as the new imperial capital. Strategically located on the Bosphorus Strait, this city became a hub for commerce, culture, and defense. While the Western Roman Empire succumbed to internal decay and invasions in the 5th century, the eastern half not only survived, but thrived. Under Emperor Justinian I, the Byzantine Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, briefly reclaiming parts of North Africa and Italy and the Iberian Peninsula. Justinian is perhaps best known for commissioning the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian Code, a monumental codification of Roman law that would go on to influence legal systems across Europe for centuries. Justinian also undertook huge public works projects, including the construction of the Hagia Sophia. That's an architectural masterpiece that remained the world's largest cathedral for nearly 1,000 years. The Byzantine military relied on a mix of traditional Roman tactics and adapted strategies suited to the empire's changing circumstances. The theme system, which granted land to soldiers in exchange for military service, became a cornerstone of Byzantine defense. They also developed advanced fortifications like double walls of Constantinople and employed Greek fire, an incendiary weapon used with devastating effect in naval battles. But diplomacy was another Byzantine strength. The empire used marriage alliances, bribes, and treaties to manage relations with neighbors like the Bulgars, the Slavs, Arabs, and later the Turks. The Byzantine court became known for its elaborate ceremonial protocols and political intrigue, often influencing foreign courts. But the empire faced numerous threats over its long history. During the Arab expansion in the 7th century, Byzantium lost much of its territory in the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa. Yet it remained a powerful force. The Macedonian Dynasty from the 9th to 11th centuries marked a cultural revival, including the reconquest of part of the Balkans and successful campaigns against the Abbasid Caliphate. But the Byzantine Empire gradually declined due to a combination of internal strife, military defeats, and economic challenges. The Fourth Crusade in 1204, during which the Crusaders sacked Constantinople, marked a turning point. The Latin occupation severely weakened the empire, which was only partially restored in 1261, and the final century saw a shrinking of territory and increasing reliance on diplomacy and tribute. Then the end came in 1453 when the Ottoman Turks, under Sultan Mehmed II, conquered Constantinople after a prolonged siege. The fall of the city marked not only the end of the Byzantine Empire, but also was a pivotal moment in world history, symbolizing the end of the medieval era and the rise of the Ottomans as a dominant power. The Byzantines' ability to adapt Roman traditions to new realities allowed this empire to endure for over a millennium, making it one of the most resilient and powerful empires in ancient and medieval history. Number 6. The Sassanian Empire. The Sassanian Empire, it's also known as the Sassanid Empire, was the last pre-Islamic Persian empire and one of the most formidable powers of the ancient world. Founded in 224 CE by Ardashir I after the fall of the Parthian Empire, it lasted until the Arab-Muslim conquest in 651 CE. During its more than 4 centuries of rule, this empire stood as a rival to the Roman Byzantine Empire, and it controlled a huge region that included modern-day Iraq, Iran, and parts of the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Persian Gulf. The dynasty traced its roots back to the Achaemenid Persians, and its founders sought to restore the Persian cultural and political supremacy. Ardashir I consolidated power by defeating rival Parthian nobles and then centralizing the authority. He established a strong state religion, Zoroastrianism, which played a central role in their governance. This fusion of church and state made the empire a theocratic monarchy, with the king seen as divinely sanctioned. Under Shapur I, the empire expanded aggressively. Shapur achieved several military victories against the Romans, capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian in a battle. That's a rare and humiliating defeat for Rome. The empire was then divided into provinces governed by officials loyal to the central authority. A complex bureaucracy handled taxation, military logistics, and legal matters. The use of written documentation and record-keeping was then advanced, and with the centralized administration, it maintained stability across vast and diverse regions. Economically speaking, the Sassanian Empire was a vital hub in Eurasian trade. It had a position along the Silk Road, and that allowed it to control trade between China, India, and the Mediterranean. Persian merchants exported textiles, ceramics, spices, and precious metals, while also facilitating the exchange of ideas and technologies. The Sassanian period was a high point for Persian art, architecture, and scholarship. Palaces, bridges, and fire temples were built with intricate stonework and stucco reliefs. Iconic examples include the Takhasra at Ctesiphon and the rock reliefs at Naqshi Rustam, which depict royal investitures and victories. Religion too was a defining feature here in this empire. Zoroastrianism became the state religion, and fire temples dotted the landscape. The Magi, the priestly class, held significant power, and religious orthodoxy was enforced. However, the empire was also home to some diverse religious communities like Christians, Jews, and Buddhists. While some periods were marked by tolerance, others did see persecution, particularly of the Christians who were suspected of sympathizing with the Roman enemy. The internal stability of the empire began to erode in the early 7th century. After the death of Khosrow II in 628 CE, a period of civil war and strife ensued. This rapid succession of rulers, coupled with an economic strain and plague outbreaks, weakened the state significantly. The final blow came with the Arab-Muslim invasions. The Sassanian forces, already weakened and politically fragmented, were defeated at key battles. The last Sassanian Empire, Yazdegerd III, fled eastward but was eventually assassinated in 651 CE, marking the end of the empire. Despite its fall, the Sassanian Empire had a lasting influence. Persian culture, administrative practices, and architectural styles were all absorbed by the Islamic caliphates that followed. The Abbasid Caliphate in particular adopted many Sassanian court customs, titles, and bureaucratic systems, and the legacy also lived on in Persian literature and national identity. The Sassanian Empire was a powerful and sophisticated state that rivaled the Roman world in political and cultural achievement. Its emphasis on centralized authority, religious orthodoxy, and artistic patronage made it a defining force in the ancient Near East. The empire's fall marked a turning point in the Middle Eastern history, but it didn't erase the enduring contributions to world civilization. Number 5. The Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyad Caliphate was one of the most powerful expansive empires of the early Islamic world, and one of the largest empires in history by land area. Established in 661, following the end of the First Fitna, or Islamic Civil War, the Umayyad Dynasty ruled the Islamic world from its capital in Damascus until its eventual fall in 750. During this period, the Umayyads presided over a remarkable expansion of territory, administration, and culture, and their reign left a permanent mark on the political and religious landscape of the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe and Central Asia. The Umayyads originated from the Quraysh tribe of Mecca, the same tribe as the Prophet Muhammad. The founder of the dynasty, Muawiyah ibn al-Sufyan, had served as governor of Syria under the earlier caliphate. After the assassination of the caliph, Muawiyah claimed the caliphate and established a hereditary monarchy, inaugurating the Umayyad dynasty. To the north, the Umayyads engaged in military campaigns against the Byzantine Empire, attempting several sieges of Constantinople. Although these campaigns were ultimately unsuccessful, they showcased the empire's military reach and ambition. In the Caucasus and Central Asia, the Umayyads came into contact and conflict with the Turkic peoples and the Tang Dynasty of China, extending the Islamic frontier across huge regions. Despite the military achievements, though, they're often remembered for the administrative innovations they introduced to govern their realm. The empire was divided into provinces, each overseen by a governor, a wali, appointed by the caliph. These governors were responsible for tax collection, law enforcement, and military recruitment. A bureaucratic apparatus staffed by Arab elites and increasingly by non-Arabs over time helped standardize governance across the caliphate. Arabic was made the official language of administration during the reign of Caliph Abd al-Malik, replacing Greek and Persian in official documents. Al-Malik also introduced unified Islamic coinage systems, minting gold dinars and silver dirhams with Arabic inscriptions and religious messages. The caliphs commissioned the construction of monumental architecture, most notably the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, completed in 691 CE. This structure is one of the earliest surviving examples of Islamic architecture and symbolized the political and religious legitimacy of the Umayyad dynasty and reflected the integration of Byzantine and Persian artistic traditions. The apex of Umayyad power happened under the reign of Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, who presided over an era of relative stability. However, underlying tensions continued to build, and the caliphate faced increasing financial strain from the cost of perpetual military campaigns. Natural disasters, famines, and internal revolts further weakened the state. The Abbasid Revolution, which culminated in the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate in 750, was fueled by a coalition of Shiites, disaffected non-Arab Muslims, and other groups who sought a more inclusive and just Islamic leadership. The legacy of the Caliphate is multifaceted. On one hand, the dynasty laid the administrative and infrastructural foundations for the Islamic empires that followed. They standardized language, coinage, and legal practices across a huge region. On the other hand, their policies of Arab supremacy and exclusion of non-Arab Muslims created tensions within the Islamic world. Culturally, this empire was a time of synthesis and transmission. The Caliphate served as a conduit through which knowledge, goods, and ideas flowed between Asia, Africa, and Europe. The use of Arabic was a common language, and the promotion of Islamic scholarship set the stage for later flourishing of science, medicine, and philosophy under the Abbasids. The Umayyad system of governance influenced Islamic political thought for centuries. Though criticized by many early Islamic scholars for their secularism and dynastic rule, the Umayyads demonstrated the viability of large-scale Islamic governance and the integration of diverse populations under a single framework. In terms of military organization, though, they maintained a standing army that included Arabs, Berbers, Persians, and Turks. Their naval fleet patrolled the Mediterranean and Red Seas, challenging Byzantine dominance and securing trade routes. The Caliphate's expansion into new territories brought a range of peoples into the Islamic fold and facilitated the spread of Islam, both as a religion and as a culture. One enduring symbol of their rule was the court in Damascus. The architecture, ceremonial practices, and systems developed there influenced courts across the Islamic world. The caliphs surrounded themselves with scholars, poets, and bureaucrats, creating an elite culture that blended Arab traditions with Byzantine, Persian, and Hellenistic influences. The Umayyad Caliphate was a defining empire of the early Islamic world. It combined military expansion with administrative innovation and cultural integration. Their reign marked the transformation of Islam from a primarily Arabian religion into a global civilization with enduring influence across continents. Number 4. The Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire. It was the largest contiguous land empire in world history. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the fringes of Eastern Europe in the west, and from the Siberian forests in the north to the Indian subcontinent and the Persian Gulf in the south. Founded in 1206 by Genghis Khan, the Mongol Empire revolutionized warfare. It reshaped the political map of Eurasia and created a vast network of cultural and economic exchange across thousands of miles. Its influence altered the trajectory of medieval and early modern history. The Mongols were originally a loose confederation of nomadic tribes inhabiting the steppes of Central Asia. These tribes often engaged in intertribal warfare and operated within a traditional system based on clan loyalty, herding economies, and seasonal migration. Genghis Khan, born to a noble but modest family, gradually unified the Mongol tribes through a combination of diplomacy, strategic marriages, alliances, and ruthless military victories. Born Temujin in 1206, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, or Universal Ruler, signaling the birth of the Mongol Empire. He implemented a meritocratic system in which commanders were promoted based on talent and performance rather than aristocratic lineage. The military was divided into units of tens, arban, hundreds, zun, and thousands, minghan, and 10,000s, tumen, forming a highly disciplined and flexible fighting force. The military there relied on speed, mobility, and coordination. Light cavalry armed with composite bows formed the backbone of the army. These warriors could fire with deadly accuracy from horseback at full gallop, enabling them to outmaneuver heavier, slower forces. Siege warfare techniques were adopted too and refined through the use of engineers and specialists captured from China and Persia. Between 1206 and 1227, Genghis Khan had led a series of successful campaigns that brought huge territories under Mongol control. In northern China, the Jin dynasty was defeated after protracted warfare. In Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire was annihilated after its ruler insulted and murdered a Mongol trade envoy. That campaign was characterized by both military brilliance and brutal reprisals, including the mass killings of civilians and the destruction of cities that resisted. Genghis Khan's empire continued to expand even after his death in 1227. His successors, including Ogedai Khan and Kublai Khan, led campaigns into Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and southern China. Under Ogedai, the Mongols invaded the Rus principalities and Poland, defeating European armies at the Battle of Kalka River, Liegnitz, and Mohi, while Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China by defeating the southern Song dynasty and establishing the Han Dynasty in 1271. At its peak around 1279, the Mongol Empire covered over 24 million square kilometers. To govern such a huge realm, the Mongols created a decentralized system based on regional khanates ruled by members of the royal family. This empire fostered economic integration across Eurasia, and the emphasis on trade and secure travel enabled what's often called the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability. Caravans, diplomats, missionaries, and merchants traveled freely across regions that had previously been politically fragmented and dangerous, so the Mongols established relay stations and postal systems that enhanced communication across these distances. Culturally, the Mongols were relatively tolerant and pragmatic. They allowed religious freedom and supported a wide variety of faiths, including Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and traditional shamanism. This openness led to an exchange of technology, ideas, and artistic styles. Paperless money, printing techniques, gunpowder weapons, and medical knowledge all moved between East and West under Mongol patronage. However, the conquests here were also marked by extreme violence and destruction. Cities that resisted were often razed, and entire populations slaughtered or deported. The psychological impact of Mongol terror tactics was a deliberate part of their strategy. That brutality was not indiscriminate but calculated to enforce compliance and deter resistance. Over time, however, Mongol rulers shifted from conquest to consolidation, becoming more invested in administration and local development. The decline of the Mongol Empire was gradual and multifaceted. Internal rivalries among khanates, coupled with challenges in succession and rebellion in subject territories, weakened the imperial cohesion. The spread of the Black Death in the 14th century, which traveled along the very trade routes the Mongols had revitalized, devastated populations across Asia and Europe. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, most of the Mongol khanates had either collapsed or been absorbed by emerging states. The Han Dynasty was overthrown by the Ming in 1368, while the Ilkhanate and Golden Horde splintered into smaller principalities. However, Mongol influence endured in regions like Central Asia and India, where successor states like the Umayyad Empire and the Mongol Empire inherited aspects of Mongol governance. Their administrative innovations, their military tactics, and the emphasis on meritocratic rule have been subjects of study for centuries. The empire's rise from a collection of nomadic tribes to a world-spanning power is one of the most remarkable stories in human history. The Mongol Empire wasn't merely a force of destruction. They were a catalyst for change, exchange, and integration on a global scale. Number 3. The Ancient Egyptian Empire. The ancient Egyptian Empire is among the most iconic civilizations in human history. It flourished along the Nile River in northeastern Africa for over 3,000 years, from around 3100 BCE to 30 BCE, making it one of the longest-lasting civilizations of the ancient world. Although Egypt experienced different periods of unity and fragmentation, including the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, it is during the New Kingdom, that's about 1550 to 1070 BCE, that Egypt reached the height of its power, wealth, and territory, establishing itself as a true empire. Egyptian political stability, architectural achievements, religious continuity, and cultural contributions have all left a legacy that profoundly influenced the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds. The foundations of the Egyptian civilization begin with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE by a ruler traditionally identified as Narmer, also known as Menes. This unification marked the beginning of dynastic rule, characterized by central governance under the divine authority of the pharaoh. Egypt's geography, with the Nile providing fertile land and acting as a transportation corridor, supported agricultural abundance, economic growth, and political cohesion. The Old Kingdom, from about 2675 to 2181 BCE, is often referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. During this time, strong central authority enabled the construction of monumental structures like the Pyramids of Giza, built for the pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menakhure. These pyramids, along with other architectural feats, showed that the state's capacity for organization, labor mobilization, and engineering would keep divine kingship as solidified, with the pharaoh viewed as not just a ruler, but as a living god who maintained a ma'at, a concept embodying truth, balance, and cosmic order. Following a period of political fragmentation during the First Intermediate Period, Egypt was reunified under the Middle Kingdom. That's about 2055 to 1650 BCE, centered in Thebes. This era was characterized by reforms, literacy and artistic development, and expanded trade with neighboring regions like Nubia and the Levant. Pharaohs like Senusret III extended Egyptian control into Nubia, exploiting the resources there and establishing fortresses to secure southern borders. However, Egypt was eventually weakened by internal problems, leading to the invasion of the Hyksos, a foreign Semitic people who ruled parts of northern Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. The expulsion of the Hyksos and the establishment of the New Kingdom, about 1550 to 1070 BCE, marked the beginning of Egypt's imperial age. Under the leadership of pharaohs such as Amhotep I, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and Ramses II, Egypt transformed from a primary Nile-centered kingdom into a far-reaching empire. Military campaigns expanded Egyptian control in Nubia and Syria, while diplomacy and trade enriched its economy. Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, conducted at least 17 military campaigns in the Levant and established Egypt as the dominant force in the Near East. Egyptian influence extended through treaties, intermarriage, and the placement of loyal officials in key territories. Amenhotep III presided over one of the most opulent courts in Egyptian history. His reign was marked by grand construction projects, including the Temple of Luxor and the Colossi of Memnon, as well as the extensive diplomatic correspondence known as the Amarna letters. These letters, exchanged with other major powers such as Babylonia, Assyria, and the Hittite Empire, provide insight into the balance of power and complexity of international relations during the Late Bronze Age. Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, is perhaps the most famous of all Egyptian pharaohs. He ruled for over 60 years and led several military campaigns, including the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. Though the battle was indecisive, it resulted in one of the earliest known peace treaties. Ramses embarked on extensive building programs, including the temples at Abu Simbel, and claimed divine status during his lifetime. His reign epitomized the power, wealth, and grandeur of New Kingdom Egypt. Economically, they prospered through agriculture, mining, trade, and tribute from conquered territories. The Nile's annual flooding ensured fertile lands for crops like wheat, barley, and flax, and mines in the eastern desert and Sinai Peninsula provided valuable resources like gold, copper, and turquoise. Trade caravans and ships transported goods like incense, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals from Africa and the Near East. Religion remained central to Egyptian life. Their pantheon included gods like Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and temples were both religious and economic centers, employing priests, artisans, and laborers. The concept of Ma'at guided ethical behavior and justified the authority of the pharaoh. Elaborate burial customs, including mummification and tomb construction, showed the importance of preparing for the afterlife. But despite all the achievements, the Egyptian empire began to decline after the reign of Ramses III in the 12th century BCE. Internal problems like succession disputes, corruption, and economic strain weakened the state. External pressures from the Sea Peoples, Libyans, and rising powers like Assyria further eroded Egyptian dominance. The Third Intermediate Period, about 1070 to 664 BCE, saw the division of Egypt among rival dynasties and foreign rulers. Although some cultural and religious traditions persisted, Egypt no longer wielded the power it had during the New Kingdom. Later periods saw domination by Nubian, Assyrian, and Persian empires, culminating in the conquest by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE and the establishment of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The final chapter of ancient Egyptian independence ended with the Roman conquest in 30 BCE, following the defeat of Queen Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony by Octavian, later Augustus. Egypt became a Roman province, and while its ancient culture persisted in some forms, the era of the great pharaohs had come to an end. The ancient Egyptian Empire is one of the earliest and most influential empires in human history. The achievements in governance, military organization, economy, art, and religion all created a civilization that endured for thousands of years and profoundly shaped the ancient world. Though it eventually succumbed to internal decline and external conquest, its cultural and intellectual legacy remains a symbol of human ingenuity and continuity. Number 2. The Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was one of the most significant empires in Chinese and world history. Lasting from 206 BCE to 220 CE, it established foundational political, cultural, and technological norms that would influence not only successive Chinese dynasties, but also civilizations across the East and Central Asia. The Han period is often divided into the Western Han and Eastern Han, separated by a short-lived interim known as the Qin Dynasty. Under Han rule, China achieved territorial expansion, population growth, cultural flourishing, and centralized bureaucratic governance. The Han Dynasty was founded by Lu Bang, a former peasant and low-ranking Qin military officer who rose to power in the aftermath of the Qin Dynasty's collapse. The Qin, though instrumental in unifying China under one ruler for the first time, had implemented a harsh and unsustainable regime. After widespread unrest, Lu Bang defeated his rivals, including the powerful warlord Jiang Yu, and declared himself emperor. He established the capital at Chang'an, near modern-day Xi'an, which became one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the ancient world. The Han administrative system was based on centralized bureaucracy, supported by a network of local officials and governors. The emperor was advised by a council of ministers and employed a meritocratic system of civil service. Although the famous imperial examination system wouldn't be fully developed until later dynasties, the Han began recruiting educated scholars and Confucian elites into official positions. One of the most remarkable achievements of the Han Dynasty was its expansion. Under Emperor Wu, often regarded as the most powerful Han ruler, the empire extended its borders in every direction. In the north and northwest, the Han launched successful military campaigns against a nomadic group that had long harassed China's frontier. To the south, Han forces moved into what are now Vietnam and southern China. In the west, the Han established control over parts of the Tarim Basin, creating the conditions for sustained trade along what would become known as the Silk Road. The Han economy was diversified and robust. Agriculture remained the backbone, with innovations like the iron plow, crop rotation, and water-powered mills improving productivity. The state collected taxes in the form of grain and labor, which supported large public works like canals, roads, and defensive walls. Trade flourished during the Han period. Silk, lacquerware, ceramics, and paper, an invention traditionally attributed to the Han court eunuch Cai Lun in the 1st century CE, were exported westwards. In return, the Chinese imported horses, glassware, precious stones, and other luxury items. The Silk Road became not only an economic artery, but also a channel for cultural diffusion, including the introduction of Buddhism into China from India. Han society was hierarchical, but it allowed for upward mobility through education and service. The family was the core social unit, and patriarchal values were emphasized. Women were expected to be virtuous, though historical records indicate that some held significant influence, especially within the imperial court. The ruling class included nobles, scholars, and high-ranking officials, while the majority of the population were peasants, artisans, and merchants. Slavery existed, but it wasn't a dominant feature of the labor system here. Religion during the Han period was a blend of traditional ancestor worship with popular folk beliefs and philosophical traditions. State rituals honored heaven and earth, legitimizing the imperial rule. Over time, Taoism and Buddhism gained some traction, particularly in the Eastern Han period, as people sought spiritual solace during times of crisis and decline. The Han military was a formidable institution. Armies were organized into divisions and supported by logistics networks. Fortifications, watchtowers, and the expansion of the Great Wall helped secure the frontier. The Han also developed a system of military colonies where soldiers and their families were settled in strategic areas to defend and cultivate the land. But despite its many strengths, the Han Dynasty wasn't immune to internal problems. Heavy taxation and forced labor requirements caused widespread discontent among the peasantry. Large landowners gained power at the expense of the central government, leading to regionalism and a loss of control. The Eastern Han saw continued achievements, but also increasing instability. Natural disasters, famines, and epidemics strained the population. The Yellow Turban Rebellion in 148 CE, a massive peasant uprising influenced by Taoist millenarianism, severely weakened the state. Although the rebellion was suppressed, it signaled the unraveling of imperial authority. By the 3rd century, the Han court was dominated by warlords and regional governors. In 220 CE, Emperor Xian abdicated the throne under pressure from the powerful general Cao Cao's son, marking the official end of the Han Dynasty and the beginning of the Three Kingdoms period. The Han Dynasty was a foundational empire in Chinese history. Its political institutions, cultural achievements, economic systems, and territorial expansion all created a legacy that endured long after its fall. While it ultimately succumbed to internal strife and external pressures, the Han period remains a touchstone for Chinese civilization and a symbol of national unity. Number 1. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most influential empires in world history. It originated in the end of the 13th century and endured until the early 20th century, encompassing over 600 years of continuous rule. At its peak in the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ottoman Empire controlled a huge territory spanning Southeast Europe, Western Asia, and Northern Africa, including some of the most strategically significant regions in the world. The Ottomans not only maintained military dominance over a huge multi-ethnic empire, but also developed sophisticated systems of governance, culture, and law. The origins of the empire trace back to a small frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia under the leadership of Osman I. Around 1299, Osman declared independence from the weakening Seljuk Sultanate of Rum and began expanding his territory at the expense of both rival Turkish beyliks and the Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans quickly proved themselves capable military strategists, combining traditional Turkic cavalry tactics with more organized practices. One of the most critical early achievements was the conquest of Bursa in 1326, which became the first major Ottoman capital and a base for further expansion. The capture of Gallipoli in 1354 allowed Ottoman forces to cross into Europe, and within a few decades they had established a strong presence in the Balkans. Under Murad I, the Ottomans won the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. That was a pivotal moment in Balkan history, and continued expanding northward. The true transformation of the Ottoman state into an empire came under Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror. In 1453, after a prolonged siege, Mehmed captured Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. This victory not only ended the Byzantine Empire, but also marked the Ottomans as a major world power. Mehmed II initiated a series of reforms that centralized authority, improved taxation, and encouraged settlement and trade in the newly conquered capital. Armenians, Jews, Slavs all established the millet system that allowed religious communities a degree of autonomy in return for loyalty and taxes. This pragmatic policy helped maintain social harmony. The apex of Ottoman power came during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, about 1520 to 1566. Under Suleiman, the empire expanded deep into Europe, capturing Belgrade, Rhodes, and most of Hungary, even laying siege to Vienna in 1529. In the Middle East, Ottoman forces seized Baghdad, Damascus, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, becoming the protectors of Islam's most sacred sites. In North Africa, they took control of Algiers and Tunis, establishing a powerful naval presence in the Mediterranean. Suleiman was not only a military leader but also a legal reformer and a patron of the arts. He's known for codifying Ottoman law, harmonizing sultanic decrees with Islamic Sharia, and ensuring justice across the empire. His reign is also noted for its architectural achievements, including the construction of the Suleiman Mosque in Istanbul by the architect Mimar Sinan. Ottoman literature, calligraphy, and ceramics all flourished under his patronage, and Istanbul became a hub of the Islamic world and culture. The economy of the Ottoman Empire was diverse and vibrant. Agriculture formed the backbone of the economy, but trade and urban manufacturing were also vital. The Ottomans controlled key trade routes between Europe and Asia, levying tariffs and taxes that filled the imperial coffers. Cities like Istanbul, Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad were centers of commerce, culture, and administration. Markets were regulated to ensure fairness, and complex taxation systems supported the state while avoiding excessive burdens on producers. Despite those strengths, the empire faced some growing internal and external challenges from the late 16th century onward. Corruption, economic stagnation, military defeats, and administrative inefficiencies began to undermine the state. The Janissaries, once an elite and disciplined force, became politicized and resistant to reform. Technological and military innovations in Europe, particularly during the Industrial Revolution, left the Ottomans behind. The empire experienced periods of revival and reform in the 17th and 18th centuries, but these were often limited in scope. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 marked the first major territorial loss for the Ottomans in Europe, and subsequent wars with Russia, Austria, and Persia chipped away at Ottoman holdings. The 19th century saw increasing foreign intervention in Ottoman affairs, as European powers competed for influence in the strategically vital empire. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856, fought with British and French support against Russia, temporarily halted Russian expansion, but revealed the empire's military weakness. This empire was often referred to as the sick man of Europe, and nationalist movements among subject peoples further weakened the authority. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution sought to restore constitutional governance and modernize the state. While the initial goals were liberal and reformist, the movement later became increasingly nationalist and authoritarian. The outbreak of World War I proved catastrophic for the empire. The Ottomans joined the Central Powers, hoping to regain lost territories, but the war accelerated the empire's disintegration. Following the war, Allied forces occupied much of Ottoman territory, and nationalist uprisings erupted across the Arab provinces. The empire was formally dissolved after the Turkish War of Independence, 1919 to 1923, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The Republic of Turkey was declared in 1923, ending the centuries-old Ottoman dynasty. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most formidable and enduring empires. Its longevity, its reach, and institutional complexity allowed it to dominate a significant portion of the world for over 6 centuries. Though it ultimately succumbed to the forces of nationalism and modernization, its legacy continues to shape the modern Middle East, the Balkans, and beyond.